Yes, yes, and but the key is often aiming for more incremental gains rather than this big magic shift.
Right, right. So that's another. You think that's another theme, looking for incremental gains and recognizing incremental gains and recognizing that this is how it's going to happen. If it's going to happen, it's probably going to happen incrementally, and you're going to have setbacks at times, and that's okay. Is that
First of all, absolutely yes, and second of all, that's not at all how I looked at the world.
uh-huh?
Personally, right? Okay, for me it was always all or nothing, or it had to be fixed, or
Yeah, like
and
right now,
so
right now.
well, I mean,
Yeah.
either it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. Like, and the problem is these slow gains, they're actually hard to see.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
And we actually have cognitive distortions around
Mm-hmm.
our illness, which are bizarre. And most people don't realize this. But and I'm not talking about, obviously we're not imagining any symptoms. No, but we do the opposite, right? So I see this in people all the time, where they have certain dysfunctions and symptoms called that plague them, horribly plague them, like the bane of their human existence, right?
Yes.
And they make recovery progress, and of course they're still ill. They still got 20 other symptoms. They got the core symptoms, but some of these symptoms either disappear or really resolve for like 80-90%, and they forget they ever had them.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd ask them, you go, so how are you doing? It's the same. I don't know, maybe a little less fatigue. I don't know. Okay, so your symptoms, are they better? No, not really. Okay, but you were talking to me last time about how severe your gut pains are, and you always diarrhea and constipation, and oh, no, actually it's normal now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But wasn't that your worst symptom? Isn't that what was really upsetting you? Because, oh yeah, it's like the worst symptom that really emotionally triggered them. When it's gone, it's like we forget it even existed.
Interesting.
And it's a really weird thing, and this is why I get people to do a questionnaire only once a month, not regularly. I don't think that's helpful at all. Keep daily tracking. Many people do this. I'm very against this. But once a month, to take a note of how did I feel over the last months, up, downs, the whole lot. You know what I mean? And it's interesting what shows up. And also it's interesting where the recovery progress tends to happen first. And you see certain patterns that I've seen over the years as well. Yeah. So, yeah.
Does it show up in one system versus another system, or?
Obviously, there's a whole variety that people have different symptoms and different recoveries. Everyone's sort of different. There is no one thing, but I've certainly seen patterns. And one of the things, for instance, that I often see is that before we see a shift in core symptoms, let's say
Right.
your POTS, your fatigue, your pain, we start to see a shift in periphery symptoms, specifically in the sensitivities. So one of the things I look in the questionnaires, I say, what are your sensitivities to sounds? What are sensitivity to light? What are your sensitivities to emotions? What are all your sensitivities to smells, right? And you start to see those shifting often first, which are sort of minor things that we don't really give much attention to. They're just like, for most of us, unless you've got multiple chemical sensitivities, they're like more annoyances,
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're more than annoyances, but we don't focus on them because we just remove ourselves from the stimulus, so it's not a problem, right? And then you see those sort of go first, and then we start to see some of the other things shifting. Yes.
Oh, it's interesting. It's interesting given that the stimuli, the sensory problems, the sensory stimuli are just so apparent in the very severely ill that they seem to
Yes.
all, or most of them seem to have that.
Yes.
And it's nice that that those things start to disappear earlier. Are there any subgroups of patients that you feel tend to recover more quickly? I mean, it's you've said that you don't see anybody that you feel like can't recover, but are there certain subgroups of certain subtypes of ME/CFS or fibromyalgia, or just this general illness that you see more rapid
So
recoveries?
the couple of things here. We often think that how resourced someone is in their situation, their life circumstances, is really important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. And so I have come across people where everything seems to be lined up.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, it's like these are the people you think should have the fastest and easiest recovery. They've got the resources, they've got the knowledge, they believe it, it's all there. And then you see them just really struggle to make any progress.
Huh.
Right? One of the things I would say is I have these miracle cure, I call them miracle cure recoveries. And I was always a bit funny about publishing them from if they were in my program, you know. But they're often the people most willing to share their recoveries, whereas the people who take 2 years, they're a bit more like, it's like, I don't want to talk about it, I just want to get on with my life. Do you know what I mean? Whereas the people who like have these miracle cure recoveries, which are few, this is not the majority of people in ANS Rewire. It's vast minority people who like 3 months later hiking in the mountains after being ill for 30 years, you know. But you get these people, right, who go from 20% functioning to hiking in the mountains after 30 years, right? And I've looked at those, you know, because I study them with intense curiosity because I'm like, what? Like, this can't be right, you know? Like, in the first couple of times it actually happened in the program, I was kind of really skeptical. I was like, all right, so what symptoms did you have and how were you ill? And, you know, and I'm really drilling these people because I'm like, did they really have this illness? And like, what can you do now? Are you 100% recovered? Or what can you do? And what do you do? And do you exercise? You know, do you working? What's happening? You know, like, I'm like this in the beginning, you know. But so what I can say about those recoveries, they're insightful because they tend to have certain things in common. And one of the things they have in common is often they tend to have resolved what led to them becoming unwell. And this is not just important for a speedy recovery, but it is also the essential component of a lasting recovery. If you do not understand how and why you ended up with autonomic nervous system dysfunction, then chances are it will either retard your recovery, stop you from recovering, you hit the glass ceiling, usually around 70%, or you will recover to a certain extent and then you'll crash, or you'll recover all the way, be well for a while, and then crash. Now, I also had a setback, right? But it's interesting about this. And so what I find is the people who do very well quickly tend to have that resolved, but not always. Yes? Sometimes I've come across people who focus solely on mind-body approaches who have these weird, fast recoveries, but they're often on very shaky ground.
Okay.
You know, like
So
they get fully recovered. I'm not doubting them, but they don't necessarily stay there because they haven't resolved what led to them becoming unwell in the first place. Yeah. And it's a number of factors. There's all kinds of factors that lead to us becoming well. So I think one of the things I always hope, but I don't successfully get, is that people who do the program, that they understand why they become unwell. And the people who, from the learnings in the programs and their reflections and their history, can go, yes, I get it. Those people tend to have the most robust recoveries.
So so would you say they have more resilience and that helps their nervous system not to overreact when things happen?
Well,
they're set, like, I know I'm good, I'm fine, and they can just move forward. Whereas if you don't really know, then there's a little doubt, and you know something happens, and the agitation starts, and the physical agitation, which, I mean, we all feel the physical agitation, you know, that they're not set, their nervous system is not settled. It's just Is that
Look,
is that what you see?
it becomes a little bit of a sensitive topic because you've got to recognize that when somebody comes fully recovered, then their physical dysfunctions should technically no longer be an issue, right? And obviously it's the physical dysfunctions that keep us ill because there's this feedback to the nervous system.
Right.
So then we say, well, if it's not the physical dysfunctions, are you saying it's a psychological illness? Well, obviously I'm not. Although I would say that, yes, there is a psychological component, just like a broken arm is a psychological problem. People go, broken arm, well, that's a physical problem. I broke it, you can see in the x-ray. No, it's a psychological issue because you were skateboarding on the roof. Yes?
But
and
you're
your
also
skateboarding on the roof led to you breaking your arm. And if you do not resolve your psychological problem of skateboarding on the roof, then that cast is not going to last very long.
But you also have this psychological problem. You also have a lot of pain. You have to deal psychologically, well, however you want to say it. And if you're in that percentage of people with a genetic predisposition to have their pain sensory pathways act up, people with rheumatoid arthritis or other chronic pain conditions, they're more like they're have a much higher risk of coming down with something like fibromyalgia. Their pain system has been tweaked, and for whatever reason, it spreads, and then they really have a problem.
Look, this is really an issue. One of the first videos I ever did 10 years ago to try and explain the root cause of this illness, I talked about what is the predisposition. And one of the things we see is when we have adverse early childhood experiences, which so many people have with this, not all people, right? But let's say more than normal in the population, right? And you go, well, why is that? And the reason is there are certain nucleus in the brain that develop all the way until we're like an adult, until we're like in our early 20s, like the locus coeruleus, right? And the locus coeruleus directly feeds towards the autonomic nervous system in order for regulation. And if that locus coeruleus does not get fully developed, right, then that's an issue. And when we experience extreme stress in childhood, that has an impact on these kind of things. Right. And so this is the issue, right? Around these predispositions, but it doesn't mean that is your destiny. Because I've seen people who've been sick since childhood. I have met people who have never been well. Yes, I know. I've heard. I know. I hear these stories, and I really feel for them because they have. Man, it's heartbreaking. Not since childhood. It's just amazing. Yeah. And it's really complicated with their recovery because I go, "Are you recovered?" They go, "Yes, I'm recovered. I've recovered." They're all excited to me, and I'm like, "Yeah, but how do you know?" "Well, I feel fully well. I've never felt this well before." "Yeah, but how do you know you're well? Like you've never felt well before." And the truth is, they're not recovered. They think they're recovered sometimes, but they're not. They might be like 60% recovered, 70% recovered. They don't know because they got no frame of reference. Yes. So just like I see people underestimating how well they are, I see people overestimating how well they are. Yeah, our objectivity around this is not very good. So, but what I can say, let me give you an example. For instance, one of the stories I've published, this lady, she had PTSD. That was right leading up to her onset of illness with fibromyalgia. Attacked in the bed, right, by an intruder. And sometime down the track after that event, ended up with fibromyalgia. And obviously not everyone has this because it's obviously not a psychological illness. It's a nervous system dysfunction, right? Some people have it after childbirth or car accident or whatever. Or viral infection. There's always something, right? And so, but she'd resolved that, right? She'd resolved it, but she was sick for another 30 years. She also, like you said earlier, made complete peace with the illness. Complete acceptance. You know, I asked her, like, how did you cope with this illness so long? She goes, well, after this many years, I started to be able to knit for 10 minutes a week. Well, not every week. Oh, that's pretty good. I'm like, pretty good. That's terrible, right? Like, what a weird thing to say. And it shows you how she had completely surrendered to the illness, completely accepted the illness. She was still looking to recover. She actually found me through your blog, right? But she was still looking to recover, but she was okay with being ill. And so this completely changed her level of stress. And when I asked her to do weird things, like when you're fainting or feeling POTS attacks, or to just change your physiology and your expectation, I mean, how stupid is that, Cort? I mean, it's just stupid, right? Why would you change your expectation on something that you know to be true? I stand up, I start feeling dizzy, I'll start to pass out. It makes no sense to change your expectation because that's a fact. And yet she was able to do that. Mm-hmm. She was able to do that and retrain her nervous system not to do that behavior, even though it made no sense, right? And she was able to do that because she didn't have the emotional baggage that people like us have, right? She was completely cool. She'd done Buddhist meditation for like 10 or 20 years.
Yeah. And
she just did this like no human being could. And so she had one of these miracle cure recoveries. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So, yeah, and another thing I find is, I guess, a couple of other factors that tend to influence people who recover more easily. I remember I think it was a blog post on yours or maybe on Pro Health, and someone came there, and people always get very angry because they think I'm saying it's in the head, which I know you know that's the complete opposite of what I'm saying. It's not a mental illness at all, right? But this person accused me of this, as always, and then they said, oh, maybe this kind of approach works for people who have mental problems.
Yes. Yeah.
But for the rest of us, it's not going to work. Well, two things. First of all, the rest of us all have mental problems. I mean, I know we're a pretty tough bunch. Probably not more so than the normal population. That's my experience, right? Mentally, we're actually tougher, which is kind of our problem, to be honest, right? But the truth is that it's the complete opposite, right? It's people who don't have mental anguish, and I think pretty much everyone does when they have this illness, but the few people who don't have mental anguish and mental health problems, for them it's actually easier to do this kind of approach. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the person was 100% wrong. It's complete opposite is true. And so if someone does have severe mental health issues, that's actually a huge obstacle.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Whereas people who don't have that tend to recover more easily, especially if they don't have anxiety.
Well, if this is an autonomic nervous system based as a stress response based disease, then you're in a real difficult situation. I mean, because virtually anything can trigger the stress response. I mean, it's almost like, I mean, I don't know what PTSD is, but it almost seemed to set you up for a PTSD response to potentially everything, because the worse it gets,
that's exactly what this is,
and the bigger
and this
the
is
hole
why you see so much.
Yeah,
that's right. That's why you see so much PTSD, because it's my view that PTSD and CFS are the same condition. It's just that PTSD tends to be around a psychological phenomenon, and it has a psychological component, where someone with CFS might have no psychological component, have no mental illness, but it's the same parts of the brain that are dysfunctioning in a similar way. Yeah. So therefore I see that as a spectrum of illness. That's why one leads to the other, right? But you can have no mental illness, no mental problems, no anxiety, no PTSD, and still have CFS.
Right. But that makes sense.
But it doesn't make it a different illness.
What about people who are just so fragile? They've tried things, and they've failed horribly. Or they're just in such a fragile state that they're afraid to try anything. I mean, you're really stuck at that point. Where your system just seems so fragile that I just don't want to disturb it because I'm afraid it's just going to go off the deep end.
Listen, you know what? I tell you, I have some strong advice. My first advice is stop listening to other people's advice. All these experts, like people like me, and who talk and, oh, this is what you have to do and this is the way. Forget all that. Forget all that. Take away the pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Forget trying to recover, right? There is no cure. There is no one single way, right? Mm-hmm. Don't even go down. Don't open a bag of worms. Forget it all. Mm-hmm. Instead, change your goalposts and do this. What can you do to make life a little bit better? What can you do to reduce your symptoms a little bit? What can you do to feel a little happier?
Yeah, yeah.
And just say, what can I do? Do those and appreciate and value those gains.
Yeah.
Do not aim for full recovery. Do not aim for all of this. It just creates you stress.
Yeah.
And you don't have the capacity to do it. You don't have the capacity to do it. Right. And it's too hard. Forget it. But do you have the capacity to just do something? And just like those bedbound people. What can I do? Can we just smile when we go and see them? Mm-hmm. Hi, sweetie. Hope you're feeling a bit better today. I'm going to put on a nice meditation room in the other room, a nice music just to listen to, and you look a little better. Try and have a rest and sleep. Give them a hug. I don't know, whatever it is that you can do that doesn't upset them, do that. Just tiny gains. And when you feel a little bit better, invest. And here's what people often do, and this is often why they hit this glass ceiling at 70. They get to like 70%, and then they get launched into life, full-time business, this, that, and then they crash.
Yeah.
It's like, instead of investing in all the things you must do, but my children and this and I have to, and you don't have to do anything. All of this is where this becomes a spiritual journey. You think you have things you need to do. Mm-hmm. You got nothing. You lie in bed. What do you have to do then? Nothing. There's nothing you have to do. It's all a fabrication of your mind. If you're that ill, you can't do anything. Mm-hmm. And what happens as soon as we get well enough, we adopt all of these responsibilities, we change our behaviors, and we're skateboarding on a roof again, so to say. Mm-hmm. Okay? And we don't give this illness enough respect. We always complain how everyone else doesn't believe we're ill, how everyone else doesn't understand how bad this illness is. We are the worst. We don't understand. Right? And I often see people have emotional breakdowns when they recover, because once they recover, they see the horrible, ridiculously unfair, unjust experience that they had. But whilst we're ill, we can't even look at that because it's too painful to even contemplate. Mm. Yeah. So we need to just say, okay, when I feel better and I'll get to 70%, I'm going to start a hobby. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm going to be well enough to start walking, and I'm going to start wildlife photography. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of approach that allows you to, invest your wellness, whether it's from the bedbound or the 50% or wherever you are, invest whatever gains in wellness in more wellness.
Wow, that's interesting, because we do tend to just want to plunge back in.
And I've seen this in hundreds of people I've spoken to. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hundreds and hundreds. It's always the same.
Fred Friedberg did this really interesting study around uplifts, and he kind of measured the number of uplifts in a person's, happy situations or gratifying situations that we're in, and then, he also assessed how well they were pacing, and he found, he found that pacing really didn't make a difference. That the people who showed improvements over time were those that had more uplifts. And that kind of seems.
So how do you define an uplift?
Huh?
How do you define an uplift?
Well, I don't remember exactly how to define them. But they were more like, good social interactions, or doing something that made them happy, or
yes.
Things like that. Not that they were well, but he thought that the better pacers would probably show more progress, but actually it was the presence of more uplifts in your life that was more helpful. I thought that was
So
he said he was shocked.
this is a very
Yeah.
very interesting insight you're sharing here, Cort, and I hope everyone just really listened carefully to what you said, right? Because that 100% resonates with everything I've seen. You know, I mean, I was looked at the other day. I've probably seen like 3,000 years of suffering with this illness now, right?
Yeah.
And like intimately, you know, a reasonable intimacy, you know, and yeah, what you're saying here is absolutely spot on. This is an essential part of our recovery.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, if this is a stress response disorder, you know, if the and we know the HPA axis is messed up, we know the autonomic nervous system is messed. Those are the two major stress responses. So taking them off, giving them some relief. It does, and like you said, you know, so they're not overreacting, and so it does kind of fit. It does kind of fit with what we know.
But here's the thing: you see, the problem with this illness is that it gets all a bit confusing, because whatever I'm going to say to you, like, and people have this problem. They see me say one thing, and I'll say the complete opposite. It's like I'm full of mixed messages, and that is because this illness there's a dichotomy in what's going on, inherent. So let's talk about pacing or graded exercise therapy, right? A very emotional topic, especially in the CFS. Fibromyalgia maybe less, right? In fact, many people talk about how fibromyalgia, graded exercise therapy is helpful, but people with CFS will go, yeah, well, I did it slowly, really slowly, and I was fine, and yes, I thought it was working, I was getting better and better, and then sooner or later they fall off the cliff.
Right.
No matter how slow they do it, right? But so we think pacing is good. Everyone says pacing is good. Well, once you started pacing, I stopped having so many flare-ups. I'm telling you, that's a good thing. You heard this in this interview, right?
Sure.
Don't push yourself. Pacing is terrible, detrimental, sensitizing. Yes. Do you want to come? Go. We're going to go. Or that's probably too much. You're sensitizing your nervous system. Not pacing, terrible. People push themselves, they do too much, they crash all the time, they keep triggering the nervous system. So pacing and not pacing are both terrible, right? Now we can see why people don't recover. So the key thing is distinctions. And this whole illness is, how do we do something? We are trying not to overstimulate. And many people like talk about calming, like you used the words earlier in the interview, calming yourself. We need to calm our nervous system. Well, I mean, how much calmer do you want to be? You saw me in that bed. I couldn't lift my hand up. I couldn't speak. Do I look like I need to relax more? Do I look like I need to do relaxing? Like, hello, I need the opposite. I mean, we're listless. We're weak, right? And sometimes we get emotional issues because we start to recognize that when we get really annoyed and angry. This is why I think so many of us are so angry with this illness. When we get angry, we get enough stress hormone somehow that we have a little bit of capability for a short time. We pay for it later, right? So the key thing here is recognizing that we actually need to stimulate the body, but not overstimulate it. We need to calm and we need to stimulate in the right measure, and we need to retrain the nervous system to respond to a stimulus. If you do not give yourself the stimulus, how can you retrain the nervous system?
Good point.
Now, most people do too much and too little at the same time. And they stress their body out so it can't recuperate, but they don't give themselves enough of the right kind of stimulus in order for them to start retraining the nervous system and making progress. So graded exercise therapy for CFS, everyone say, well, it doesn't work, it leads to disasters, makes people more ill. I can't argue with that. I mean, most people have that experience, and yet I can tell you many people who've done graded exercise therapy have recovered. I've spoken to them, right? they didn't necessarily do it in quite the way that they were taught, or the way they were taught had some distinctions and caveats that are not widely discussed, right? It's not a linear thing. To think of it as rigid and linear and I must do more every day, I mean, would you tell someone with CFS to do that? We all know where that's going to lead to. Yet, there is value in these things. So it is the distinctions. It is not what we do to recover. It is how we do it. Mm. And that is probably the biggest message I want to give to people. It's how you do it. And if you can aim for small incremental gains, sometimes without the pressure of a full recovery, and just look at investing your wellness into something that makes you happier and not push yourself, not get back to those shoulds and musts right away, then I think that can really serve you. So that would be my closing message today.
Well, let's end on that. Let's end on that note. It's getting quite dark here. That's a good note to really a fascinating conversation for me. And you've obviously thought about this so deeply, and you brought some things forward that I haven't heard before. And I really appreciate the chance to talk. And I'm sure there's more to talk about, and I hope we can do it again in the future. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this interview. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to share my insights, and I hope everyone enjoys it.